Hello, everyone, and welcome to the October 11th meeting of the Westford Budget Task Force. We're glad that you're here and working hard against our October 18th deadline to complete this report and have all the information available for everyone to review. First up is approval of minutes. So let's see. We have the September 27th and the October 4th minutes. Are there any comments on those minutes? And if there are, I'll entertain a motion to approve.
So moved.
Okay. Second. Okay, all in favor? Raise your hand if you're able to vote on that. Okay, that's great. That's majority. So let's just recap the timeline in terms of preparing the document. We are getting very close to having the document ready to go. There are many authors and many contributors, so lots to integrate into a single document. So we expect to release this to the boards, the three convening boards, the select board, the finance committee, and the school committee, maybe tonight, more likely tomorrow, but very soon. So they'll have a good week to digest this before we present it to them formally, which is on the 18th. So today we'll talk about a couple things. We'll talk about just a few other background details of completing the document. We'll talk about our plan for the October 18th presentation. And over the weekend, I sent a sort of draft deck around with some assignments. We can talk about that. We can talk about sort of one idea, which is the idea of should we investigate what a good market basket community should be for us on the municipal side. That sort of fits into the broader category, though, that we'll discuss, which is, are there any process improvement, lesson learned items that we want to put in our report as suggestions to the various boards. This committee did a lot of work that I think uncovered some things, and maybe some of that work could be incorporated into regular routine process in a useful way. So we'll talk about that. And then we'll talk about future meetings. I don't expect to use the whole time window today that we normally do, but we certainly can if that's where we go. So one thing that's a really important element to this report is kind of a roll-up estimate of what the potential shortfall that we might face would be with these big cost increase items that we've been discussing for months. We wanted to give both the municipal folks and the school folks another chance just to go through line by line and feel very confident, as confident as we can. Things will change from here for sure, but feel confident about the what's in there. So we are asking them to do a last look, and that last look will generate sort of an update that will be part of the report. So we don't have those numbers now. That's sort of in progress. So that will show up in the report that gets distributed. Valerie?
Can I just get an idea of when to expect those?
Well, I was thinking that we were probably going to be pushing to tomorrow, and so I'd ask that Dan and Jenny and company have it ready tomorrow morning. So I don't know if that works. We could ask them to move it up if that was sort of critical. I guess, Dan, what's your feeling?
It works for me. I just want to have an idea so that I'm not like,
okay.
You know.
If tomorrow morning works for Val, that works for us too. I think we could use the time.
Okay, so why don't we agree that we're going to push the release of the report until sometime early afternoon tomorrow, and that Dan, I guess since Dan's doing the full roll-up, Dan will get that full roll-up to Valerie, sometime in the morning. I'm sorry, Jenny, did you have something?
Yeah, tomorrow morning works fine.
Okay, all right, let's stick with that. It's more important that we feel good about it than it's Wednesday versus Thursday at this point. Okay, and then walking forward from there, we will prepare we'll talk a little bit today about the presentation. We'll have a chance to review the presentation and rehearse it in next week's meeting. And then the 18th will be I guess it'll be the evening of a week from today. So we'll review it around lunchtime and be ready for the evening presentation of that. Any other questions or discussion just about the general timeline from here? I guess maybe for Valerie, I know people are still feeding you little bits of content. I just sent you something a few minutes ago. and I hope people who have done a read through and identified things have sent you their comments. Anything that you need, either in terms of help or inputs, Valerie?
I don't think so. I mean, everything that flagged for me, I sort of dumped into emails in the last couple of days for everybody individually. And then just really having that consistent shortfall number throughout the report is important. That's all.
Okay, and for committee members, if they did want to look at the current draft, just to be able to read part of it or give you any feedback if they saw it. I know that you're working on your own editing copy, which makes perfect sense.
Well, so I couldn't figure out in the Microsoft Word version, like how to sort of lock down access. And then I was struggling with some formatting issues. So I ended up moving it all into Google. So now I'm working on like a totally separate document. I would say the last current version though is the one that was with my name on it. But I don't know. I don't want to open it up too much at this point. Like sorry.
Yeah, no, I know what it's like. Chaos can rule, and well-intended person can accidentally delete the whole thing. Okay, so if you do have time, I think a lot of the content is probably pretty similar. So if you did have time and wanted to look at the document, it'd be the one on Dan's OneDrive for now. But you'll have the opportunity to look at the full and final in about 24 hours. So in terms of distribution, I don't know why I was thinking this, but I was thinking that each of us, Valerie, Christina, and I would maybe write a little intro and then send the draft report to our own committees. I don't know if that makes sense. I sometimes feel like people are more likely to read something if it comes from their own chair than if it comes from some other place.
Yeah, that's fine. I mean, I warned everybody last night at our meeting, so that everybody I think knows this is coming. So I don't know about an intro needed, but yeah, that's fine. I figured once I was done that I'm going to put like a watermark on the back of draft, right? And then would send it in PDF form to all of us on the call, on this task force. And then Christina, you and I can disseminate. But that
sounds great.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but that version won't go public yet. Or it was not my intent to make that public. The public one will go in the packet for the meeting that will be on the 18th. Kristen, is there any reason we would need to make this first draft that's going to the boards public?
So the only way it would have to be public is if we get a public records request. So we can circulate it to our various boards, keep it internal. But if there is a public records request, we do have to release it within 10 days. So that's clearly after the meeting. So I'm not really concerned.
Thanks.
Okay.
And I mean, aside from something that like somebody's still working on a number or something, I would imagine tomorrow lunchtime it's going to be complete. It's just I have some ideas on like the formatting that would change, and I was hoping to get a couple more days for that part.
Yeah, I think that's fine, and certainly anybody on this call, pretty soon you'll be able to get the copy in the packet. The packet will be available on Monday, maybe, Kristen? I'm trying to remember when the packet would be available for a Wednesday meeting.
Yep. So Monday afternoon.
Okay.
Great. That would be great.
Okay. So anyone watching, we're going to keep this sort of draft internal only just really for logistical convenience, and then you'll be able to see the final on Monday. Or I'm not sure what final means. I think the document will probably continue to evolve and have minor tweaks for a little bit longer. Okay, maybe that's all on the document itself. Many thanks again to everyone who contributed, because it's a whopper. I don't know what the page count is, but it's a lot. Okay, for the presentation. So what I did is I shared the presentation with people who had slide assignments. What I'm thinking we'll do is, hopefully once this document is done, folks can, well, here, let me share this. Maybe I can. Dan, do I have sharing privileges?
Yeah.
Okay. Let me figure out what I want to share here. I think this is the right thing. Oh, that's not it. Sorry. Wrong email. Okay. Here we go. So this is just the assignments that I sent out. And then I'll share the document as it currently exists, although there's almost nothing in it. Seem like what the flow would be, the intro deck. I think would use Erica's excellent process flow diagram just to kind of reorient everyone to what's going on. The opening slide has all of us, all the committee members. And then from there, I thought what would make the most sense would be to have basically go through what's in the document, but at a high level and extracting things that we really want to draw people's attention to. So I asked if Dan could prepare kind of a summary level of the highlights of the budget challenges, sort of what's brought us here, ending with this sort of summary number that we're working on over the next 24 hours, just doing a refresh or an update on, which would sort of highlight what we think the shortfall is. And again, we just would have wanted to draw people not to every detail, but just to the main things that are contributing to the situation, because the details in the report. I thought then we could do the new revenue options. So Jen and I will split up those, but again, really drawing on the items in the executive summary that we've identified for further study. We may decide there's a few others that are likely that people would expect that we want to include, but I think largely we'd focus on those. And then the benchmarking group, asking them to share. I wrote 5 or 6 slides. It could be fewer if that made sense, but just sharing some of the high level takeaways that we have from the benchmarking work that we've done. And then a couple slides on efficiency gains. So again, the particular people who are preparing those can be, we can be flexible. But the idea here again is to try to highlight things that we want to put further action on. And then in our last meeting, the idea of sort of picking up on some reflections of things that could be useful process improvements. And then also some potential next steps that we can offer up as options to the boards in terms of things that this committee might do. I think if I did my math right, that would take about 45 minutes to go through that sort of overview. And that would leave us 45 minutes for questions, answers, discussion with the various boards, which seems like about the right balance for that kind of meeting. I guess any reaction to that as a plan? I know that we've been really focused on the document, so the work on the slides will sort of shift into that gear. And I sent around a template that we can use. It's actually the same template, just sort of formatting slide template that we used before. So if people are creating slides, they can know what format they're on. Maybe I'll just quickly shift over to that. I don't know if there's anything useful on the deck itself, but I can just show you what that looks like. So again, I already described this, but just the same intro slide, the outline that we just discussed, Erica's graph to kind of orient people into what we've done, and then just really placeholders for the stuff that we just talked about. Okay, so next time we meet next week, that'll all be done, and we'll be deciding who's going to present what. We may make some suggestions about that earlier. I think it was pretty helpful to have different voices presenting different parts. So of the 20 slides or something, maybe we'll try to split it up between, say, 4 or 5 presenters. Any thoughts or reactions to that? Okay, well, I'll be tracking that. Emily or Valerie's, hard work on the editing. I'll track the presentation and just make sure that we're, say, by the beginning of next week, we've got all the draft slides together and can integrate it into a single piece. The other thing we wanted to come back to today is sort of reflections, process improvements. And I'll get my pen so I can take notes, but there's some great ideas that came up last time. Some of them were, for example, the one thing that was very, very helpful in the solid waste contract, for example, was to make sure that we had all the reasonable bidders that were providing like services in the Commonwealth bidding on our contract. It was, I would argue it was E.H. Harvey or E.L. Harvey's fault that they didn't see it and bid on it, but maybe we need to add a step where we're looking at, you know, who else is providing these similar services to our neighbors and make sure that they invite them into the bidding process or somehow make sure that they're aware of it. That could have been pretty helpful. The other thing that's come up already is the ambulance fees that came out of Shanna doing kind of a market basket look at what other communities are doing. I think institutionally as a town, we thought we'd been doing that all along and checking in on what the rates were, but that's different than having a regular process requirement where you go to a meeting and you show a spreadsheet based on what you've actually done in terms of research. And for certain things, you know, for the revolving fund, anything that's collecting fees, it would be, you know, helpful, I think, in good practice just to come back and do that on some regular basis. You could argue that in the schools discussion with some of the unions, doing a periodic refresh of the market basket along the way might have helped give us some insights on where we were. I think, at least in some of those negotiations, we ended up, things had drifted farther than we were aware. And that made it, you know, a little bit more of a surprise what we need to do to catch up. So could be a similar thought there. Other ideas? What else struck people about either things that we learned or identify that we might want to recommend as sort of process improvements in future budget cycles or just future work in the town? Christina?
Yeah, I had a few things as I was looking through the other budgets of the other towns. There were a few things that really struck me as being super helpful. And I think Kristen actually adopted some of these in her request to the department heads this go round. So it'll be interesting to see what the budget document looks like. But what I found really helpful was there were a couple of towns that added revenue sources to each department. So if they had a revenue source, whether it was a fee or a grant or, you know, whatever it was just helpful to sort of balance the expenses against this particular department's, you know, sort of personal revenue. Just kind of oriented yourself a little bit about, I guess, what sort of the net cost of this particular department was. Because if you saw one department that, you know, let's say it was $1 million or something, but they're bringing in like $600,000 in grants, well, then you're like, well, that's a bargain, right? 400,000. It's not like if we cut this, we'd be saving $500,000 or whatever. So it was sort of good to see that balance in the budget document. There were several other towns that also had statistics for each department. So it was just a short little table. And I'm just going to pull the police department because it's the quickest thing I can think of for statistics. But, you know, they had call volume. They had, you know, whatever, different types of calls that they were responding to. So you sort of got an idea of their workload in a sense. And I found that really helpful also. A couple of the other things, budget process wise, I feel like we're kind of doing this already, but the joint board meetings at the beginning of budget cycles, whether it's a chairs or a full committee, I think would be good. Also, there were also a couple of towns, I want to say maybe Lexington, that had like almost like a budget summit, sort of late summer, maybe September, before they started with all three of their major boards to get that input that would then go to the town manager. Because I feel like the school committee kind of misses out on that. You know, like obviously the select board gives input, finance committee gets to see the budget policy, but I don't think there's a formal step where the school committee kind of gets their input as well. And it might be helpful to sort of move that up a little bit before we start kind of divvying out the money and, you know, parceling everything out. I think that's about all I have for now. There may be a couple of other things, but that's what struck me.
That's super helpful. If you have an example, or Kristen, maybe you know an example too of an example town report that has like the little KPI, key performance indicator box, or has the revenue source by department, like the grants offsetting, that'd be great. I can just do a little screenshot and stick that into our
Okay.
recommendations.
Yep, I do. I'll go back and look.
Okay, thanks for that. Jenna?
I sent a little list to Valerie already with my thoughts, but just to share the wider audience, I guess. One of mine, Tom, I think takes what you were just saying about the Harvey trash contract thing kind of to a broader spectrum of when we have big things happening in town. Is it possible for Kristen, not to call her out, but as the town manager, right, to maybe engage with surrounding town managers who we know will maybe have done something similar, right? And so that goes to the same Harvey concept, but just to a broader space. Like if we're going to go out to do bus contracts, like has someone else done that recently? Maybe we've missed a bidder. If there's a possibility that we consider the cannabis topic, we know Tewksbury did that recently, so maybe that might be helpful to have that kind of coordination. So I think maybe opening lines of communication with other towns. It sounds to me like Kristen and Christina's conversations with the various towns were really enlightening. And so maybe we need to be doing more of that on smaller scales and, smaller topics. So I thought that was one piece I wrote down. I also had the fees that I put. One of the things in the rental space was just advertising the rental more. So this was a little bit more of a recommendation to the schools to Dr. Chu was, the town rentals, the school's really the biggest place right now to be able to have rental opportunities. Are we advertising that? Maybe we should have something in like the WPS billboard, or, how can we kind of maybe gain a little bit more traction in that space to help offset, other costs, right? If we can make that a little bit more revenue generating. And then I think the last real thing that I had was, and I think this came up in some of the public feedback as well from both our forum and also the strategic planning, was maybe making recommendations to or changes to how like the whole capital planning process is being done. As we're looking, is there a way as a town to be a little bit more holistic in our broad recommendations of things that are in the 5-year roadmap, and how to offset that with expenses a little bit better, and prioritizing the way that we as a town prioritize some of those capital planning adventures, given upcoming expenses, and how maybe we need to as a town do a better job. Maybe there's a different oversight of being able to bring in expenses and budgetary risk into the capital planning conversation at a higher scale. So that as we're talking about things like we may need to do an override this year, or that may come before voters, do they have a better idea of what other things in the pipeline from a priority level might be coming before them and then in the next year or two that would also cause a tax increase, so that they have that ability to be able to offset? Do I want to vote here knowing that this is coming down the pipeline? And maybe just a better way as a town of approaching capital planning and budget planning a little bit more holistically. And that, to me, in this exercise, as a regular old citizen of Westford, felt like it was really missing. And we definitely heard that in a lot of our public feedback as well. Things. And I think it kind of also goes back to that library town building where we were asking for these things in a really close time frame, and really not being able to generate public appetite for doing both at the same time. And so how can we do better with our strategic planning? Especially, I think it's really critical right now, knowing that we have a lot of school-based capital planning initiatives that might be coming down the pipeline from the sustainability study that are going to be hot topics in town in the future. So I think that for me was a really big takeaway, is that maybe we're not doing the best that we could from a planning perspective.
Yeah, that's good feedback. Before I react to that, Kristen, did you have a response to something that Shanna said? You're on mute, Kristen.
Second time today, Tom.
No
I just want to react to what Shanna had said, as the select board did allow us to go out for a request for proposal to create a town-wide strategic plan, so we can actually gauge the interest of the residents and the business owners of what they really want. And then we can develop a roadmap, a 5 to 10 year roadmap of where do we actually put our budget towards Do we put it towards things that we're already doing now, or do we direct it in other locations? And at all of the budget meetings I've been having with the department heads, I've been talking about going more towards priority-based budgeting rather than line item budgeting, and, you know, aligning those budgets towards what the needs and the requirements and the requests of the community are. We're also lining up, which is out right now, we hope to get bids back tomorrow, a major facility space analysis and capital plan, so we can lay all that out and integrate with the school's facility analysis. So hopefully we have a roadmap. It's probably going to take another year to get that roadmap, but hopefully we have that roadmap for the fiscal 26 budgeting process.
Yeah, so maybe if there's like a blurb that we can put that into, if we end up putting something reflections, because that definitely came up in a lot of feedback, was how are we planning in the future and how are we changing that? And it sounds like you're already starting to put some things into place. And, you know, from a budgetary perspective, maybe, you know, a consultant is great, but maybe this is a longer term thing where we need a part-time person that we find the budget for. And even though it feels like we're adding to the budget, right? But it's a longer term viewpoint where maybe paying somebody part-time that works on Dan's team from a finance, or, you know, on somebody's team, ends up saving money in the long term in terms of our capital planning. And so I think just thinking about strategically, getting through maybe a consultant, but then how are we going to continue to do that as a town long term to stay ahead of what we need to stay ahead of?
Yeah, it's a great point. It's something that a number of other people like Chris Barrett have brought up to me, which is if the way we do capital is we create a long-term wish list, then we only take the most urgent 12-month programs, and then we only do what we can afford given sort of the current concept of constraint. The risk over time is that you build up an inventory of neglected stuff that gets more costly to fix. So his question is sort of how do you break the wheel, and how is there a mechanism where the capital committee, for example, could come forward and say, for the long-term strategic interest, we need to bucket these things. It's going to save money over time. It's a more responsible approach. And it does mean that we have to, you know, take a concerted action as a town instead of sort of picking things off that are, you know, the most likely to fail in the next year. So I'll think of a good way to try to incorporate sort of the whole capital idea here, both what we're doing and sort of raising the question of how do we take a step back and take a little bit more strategic view from budgeting as well. This may be something,
Tom, I think that also goes to the, how do we not get in the same position that we're in now 5 years again from now, right? Where we need another budget task force. You know, we know that they did this exercise, in 2007 or 8, and it seems like a few things got implemented, but maybe not a lot, right? So maybe having a more, the town taking a more strategic and purposeful view will allow us to continue to set ourselves up for the future.
I think you're exactly right. And you're gonna have to help me remember, maybe Valerie can, whether one of our recommendations at the top level of the executive summary is to do a town land inventory. One of the things you brought up, Shannon, was so also economic development. As I was updating that, one of the highest uses of economic development is to convert something from tax exempt or not tax generating into something that has a taxable purpose. So the idea is the town owns 120 parcels or some big number of parcels. You know, are all of those currently at the best and highest use, or some of those, it's a one-time thing, but should some of those be put into a tax paying situation? Is that in one of the recommendations, or would we add that as a reflection?
It's not in the executive summary, and to me, it feels more like a reflection. I mean, I think it gets mentioned in the land. I'm trying to think of what the
Yeah, it's in the revenue recommendation, but yeah, yeah, we definitely do not have a catalog, right?
That's the part that I think is the next step, reflection connection.
Yeah, we have 300 something properties, Dan, if I remember off the top of my head, and I went to a bunch of different people. No one could really describe to me how many of those are viable development properties versus land restricted versus zoning restrictions versus just not development, you know, able to be developed. And so there was no real clear path to say, of the 300, 2 of them are viable properties that if the town decided they wanted to sell at some point, would have so just think cataloging the land itself would be beneficial.
And Shayna, other towns have done that. I can get some examples out to this group.
Yeah, I think that's.
And it could also be another purposeful use of the land. I mean, so we could say we want more affordable housing in town, and this parcel could be, it's zone residential, it could be appropriate for that. We want to bundle that into some. So it wouldn't, one option could be that we basically sell it to a developer, but the other could be we pursue some other important goal of the town with it. So
Or even open space, maybe there's something like, we want to put another green space, from a.
right. Yeah, I think a lot of it is purposeful. I mean, the vast majority of the parcels are purposefully green space or required for town operations or something. But okay, so I'll add the sort of land inventory to the catalog too. Valerie?
I have two, I guess, reflections to share. One is that in preparation for sort of looking at the report as a whole, I refreshed my memory on Hingham's report, and I just can't stress enough how different our situations are, because I feel like Hingham right out of the gate just says, hey, we added 30 positions with ESSER and ARPA funds, and now we have a deficit. And we could not be further from that. I feel like that our situation, that's a problem, and sort of they owned up to it. But our situation doesn't feel like it was our own doing. I just am trying to think of how to weave into the report almost to continue sound financial practices that Westford has been doing, right? Almost like a mini pat on the back, because we didn't do that with those funds. And it was actually a question we heard at the League of Women Voters Forum, which was, is this because of those funds coming in that now we have a cliff? And I don't see that as our reason for our current situation. And so I'm just really proud of that. And I also want to find a way to sort of highlight that in the report, and as a reflection or recommendation to keep doing that and to applaud us for that, I guess. Hope that made sense. The other reflection I have is about, and I think this has been sort of long time, the more years on school committee and the more we sort of evolve our own internal budgeting, is about special education expenses, and really understanding and finding a way to make it more easily understood to the community, how much that impacts our budget and how unpredictable it is. Most of our budget, you could give us a 2% growth year over year, and well, I know it's not really 2%, so I probably shouldn't say that, but you could roll most of our budget over with predictable budgeting, and then the special education placements could wipe out any strategy or planning that you have. And I don't know if this is really a substantial approach or a solid recommendation, because I'm a little too scattered to think it through. But one idea would even be to almost pull it out of the school budgeting and say, this is just like stormwater. This is just an expense or OPEB, right? This is just an expense that the town has to take off the top, and then the rest of the school budget sort of has this predictable year over year growth. Does that make sense? I don't want to make that as a formal recommendation at this point, but I think that something about those expenses and elevating that on the town consciousness would be, maybe I'm not saying it right.
No, I think
Yep.
you're right. I mean,
Okay.
if the idea is that the budget summit kickoff that we do, whether it's joint chairs or that we add a new event, with broader participation, if there's any externality that has a huge impact that is essentially out of our control, it makes sense to highlight that before we begin to do allocations in the budget. Because you're right,
Yeah.
if there's $1 million jump in something that we either don't have control over, or something like special ed, where we consider it sort of our sacred mission to provide what students need, and we're not going to compromise that.
Right.
Highlighting that first makes a lot more sense than, sort of implying that people just have to sort of suck it up in their budget when that's just not reasonable or possible.
Right. And I don't know if
So-
this is what Dr. Chu is going to say, but it changes like monthly, right? Like, so it's not just, we have a plan in September or October that we can sort of communicate. It's just having people understand how wildly it can fluctuate.
Yeah, I mean, an individual placement can be hundreds of thousands of dollars, right? So let's maybe Chris, just since it looks like you're reacting to that, let's go to you first and then Shannon.
Sure. I was actually going to say it's similar. Like we have our special education stabilization fund that we had established a few years ago, but we haven't been able to successfully build it up to what it should be. And that in itself is kind of what Valerie's talking about, because it could act as maybe more consistent or more similar to the healthcare fund that we have, right? Like the idea is that can change, right? We know that as having our own, the town having that, and if we're able to, we know that would be a good thing for us to be building up, and we've been trying to build that up, but then we know that we would be able to predict certain costs, knowing that then there was a reserve that then would allow for that, for the variability that exists then.
Yeah, and maybe Dan and Kristen, if there's other things like that besides special ed that is both significant dollars and highly variable, we may want to add and say it's a category of thing. It's not just one thing. It's special ed, and I'm not sure healthcare is exactly like that, but it may just be the one. But if it's really a category heading, maybe we can describe that as a process step before we do any initial allocation. Shanna. You're on mute. Shanna, you're on mute. I think we've all caught the mute.
Oh, I thought I unmuted myself
Okay.
in preparation, so I was ready when you called on me. I wanted to just expand on Valerie's point, which I say with some trepidation, but what a lot of the feedback that I heard from the strategic planning was how often are we looking at changing outplacement special ed to in-house special ed? And so I think I would also kind of potentially propose that expanding on that comment a little bit is from an educational perspective of educating the community. Is there other ways that we could control special ed costs or not, right? And how often or how frequently have we considered the possibility of bringing some of that stuff back in-house? What would that at least roughly look like from a financial perspective? Because I think there's some necessity to disprove or prove that doing one way or the other is more or less cost effective. And I'm not sure that that's getting adequately communicated to the general public in that sense, especially where it is something that fluctuates. So I think maybe talking a little bit more, having the school committee and superintendent talking a little bit more about how maybe they can educate differently or better in that space would be a takeaway from this exercise as well.
Yeah, and we've got two of those under the efficiencies idea. It's just that they also require some initial investment, right? So we couched it in the section of, yeah, you could, expand this program or that program but it's not just a straight, sort of savings, right? Or it's like there would be some cost initially too. But yeah, great point.
Yeah, I know that Westford Public Schools, at least back in the day when I was more closely associated with that, had a strategy for what was really, our opinion was a better educational outcome, and it was something that might manage costs over time by trying to do more in the building before we move people to outplacement. But yeah, stating what the strategy is and then testing a little bit by talking to other communities might also be helpful. Wow, we're already up to 7 or 8 reflections. That's great. Other things that people may have thought of along the way? Okay, well, that's a lot. So we'll have a chance to react to this again. This will show up in the draft that we'll try to circulate early next week. So if you have other ideas after this, I'll work on that section, so you can just email them to me.
Did we want to highlight those in our presentation next week as well, or no? Just throwing that question out.
I think so. Yeah, I think we should have so this started, I think, I don't remember Valerie started, it was a great idea when she brought it up, but I think the idea started almost that this is what we want to present to the committees. And then we'll integrate it into the document. So yes, I think the intention is to spend some slides on this because I mean, the people we're talking to, the people who can choose to implement it. So. Okay. Aside from scheduling future meetings, I think future meetings, the topic is, we'll meet next week. And I think based on the guidance that we get from the three committees, we can decide what comes next. There may be a need to get back together if there's final tweaks on the document, there may be, I have a couple ideas that have come up I didn't have these ideas. A couple ideas came up in previous meetings for things that we might offer up as options to the board, like preparing a video summary of the work so that there's just another way to do the public education, coming back and hosting a meeting in 6 months to talk about what implementations look like on the suggestions that we've had. And there are probably some other good ideas too. I'm sure there are other good ideas too of things that we could offer as a committee. I think that we probably will be asked in the town meeting in the spring to speak, I would think. But other than that, I don't think there's a need for kind of regular weekly meetings. I think it'll be more based on some driver, some occasion. Okay, I think that's everything that I had on my agenda and a bunch of good suggestions. Is there anything else that people want to touch base on? You'll see the final, not the final, but the draft document sometime tomorrow in your inbox. You'll see a draft of the presentation sometime early next week. If you did receive the email with some assignments, if you have any questions about what those assignments are, just give me a call. We can figure it out. Okay, looks like maybe we'll wrap up just a couple minutes, half an hour early. Okay, well, if there's nothing else, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
A second, okay. All in favor? Great, thank you, everybody. And we've got a big push over the next week, but it's been a great project for the town. So thank you again for all your work.
Thank you for your
Good
hard
day.
work, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Have a good rest of the day.